Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Mark Howe. I'm the Managing Director at Google for our agency-facing business across EMEA. Today, I am delighted to be joined by two men who, if you've worked in advertising for any period of time, should be very familiar to you. Peter Field and Les Binet. Les is Head of Effectiveness at Adam & Eve DDB and has been closely involved with the IPA Effectiveness Awards for a number of years, having won more awards than any other author. Peter has been an independent consultant for more than 20 years after leaving the agency world as a strategic planner. His most recent work, The Effectiveness Code, was published virtually at this year's Cannes Festival with great aplomb. Both are often referred to as the godfathers of effectiveness. So in that light, it's my job today to get a better understanding, perhaps, of why, in their view, advertisers need to focus more on brand building rather than pure activation, why advertisers are failing to do so, and how these same advertisers should reach consumers in this digital multimedia age. So, a very warm welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Why is brand building so important?
So what we have throughout all of that work done is looked at empirical evidence. So what we say is not an opinion, it's what we learn from the data. And what we know is that if you want to drive long-term success, you really need a powerful brand behind you. We learned that first in Marketing the Year of Accountability. But then when we looked at long and short effects in the long and the short of it, which we published 10 years ago now, I think.
2013.
We realised that what had been a very stable situation for decades of a mix between brand and activation of about 60-40 was beginning to change. And that actually the effectiveness was hard-rooted in that balance. We looked at how that critical balance between what we do to build the brand for long-term effectiveness and what we do to drive short-term sales off the back of that enthusiasm for the brand, how that balance has played out over time. But it is critical that it's a balance. A lot of people have said, well, we're all about brand. We're not all about brand. We're about a balance.
Yes. What we've done over the years, over the last 20 years, is basically tried to get some empirical readings on how advertising and marketing works. And there's an awful lot of waffle, a lot of talk, a lot of opinion. We're looking for evidence. And I think the core of what we found fascinating and surprising is in that first chart that we produced in Marketing in the Year of Accountability in 2007, which showed that emotion is really the most powerful force for driving long-term sales growth and profit. We were brought up to believe advertising was really a communications medium for transmitting, motivating, selling messages. And I think what we learned right back then in 2007 is that's not really true. Advertising primarily works not by communicating messages, but by making people feel something.
Yeah.
Emotions are the key to long-term brand building, which is what drives growth and margins, and ultimately is the main driver of profit.
As you say, you first started thinking about this in 2007. Long and short of it was published in 2013. How has your thinking evolved over that 7-year period, or even over that 10-year period?
Well, pretty much everything that we've done since the long and the short of it was published has been really about understanding how the rules are evolving. And in order to understand that properly, you've got to understand how the rules play out in different media and different contexts for different brands in different categories and so on. So the two main books that we published on that look at the changing media environment, which is Media in Focus, and how the rules vary in different contexts, which is Effectiveness in Context, and also the report that we published on B2B.
The fundamentals haven't changed. I think that's the critical thing. I mean, a lot of people say, and this has been a very worrying and growing trend in the last 10 years, really, since, I guess, the advent of big data in many ways. People have said brands have no real value in the modern world. Now, we fundamentally challenge that. I mean, it is really, really important to the profitability as well as growth ability of businesses that there is a powerful brand. You've got to constantly recruit people to a brand. It's not good enough just to keep going back to the same customers or indeed a limited pool of prospects. You've got to look wide. You've got to go for the fruit, if you like, at the top of the tree, not just the low-hanging fruit. So we live in a world which is all about quick and easy wins, low-hanging fruit, and it's just not good enough if you want to build long-distance brands, some of the great brands, they were not founded on small thinking and niche targeting and low-hanging fruit. They were founded on big visions and big ambitions. And when you want to do that, you really have to reach broad. You've got to get your brand out there as big and as famous and as broad as we can.
What is the role, therefore, of emotionally rich media, like video, in brand advertising?
The process of building a brand, which is ultimately about preparing someone to buy your product at some point in the future, takes a very long time. When somebody buys a car, that process of making the decision starts maybe 10 or 20 years before they actually come to buy it. Even the process of selecting a chocolate bar, as I did earlier on, that decision has been brewing in my mind ever since I was at school. In order to really build strong brands, you've got to start preparing consumers long before they even start thinking about the product or the purchase. That means engaging them when they're not interested in what you have to say, when they're not thinking about the product, when they have no need to be satisfied. So you can only do that by engaging with them with things which are intrinsically interesting at a human level and that will be remembered for a very long time. So emotion is the most powerful selling tool we have. And therefore, emotional media are much more powerful for building brands and generating profit.
How has the availability of online video alongside television, how does that mix play out now?
The fundamental dynamics of emotion haven't changed at all because they're built into our biology. But we've just now got new ways of getting it to people.
Yeah.
There is a kind of double-edged sword here, isn't there? Because one of the big changes that we've seen in the last 15, 20 years, of course, is targeting ability. Yeah. Whilst it's seductive, everyone would like to be able to target their message or their ads very precisely. It is, when it comes to brand building, I think dramatically overrated because actually we want to be broad. They're very different when it comes to short-term activation targeting, very, very useful attribute of new digital tools. But when it comes to brand building, it is much less useful. It's not to say it is irrelevant, but it is less useful. But the trouble is that we've educated a generation of marketers now into thinking that laser pinpoint targeting is really smart. Yeah. And of course, that really only applies to the 40, not the 60. But it's when people become obsessed with laser targeting, they start to walk away from breadth of targeting that we see the double-sided, the double edge on this. And we have to, we do bang on about this, and for which our humble apologies. But it is really important that people understand that these are two different worlds, the short and the long, and they call upon different qualities of different media.
In many ways, online marketing and online media has done itself a disservice by focusing on targeting more than reach. A couple of very interesting studies that are out there. One was a study by Nielsen about the relative contributions of reach versus targeting in effectiveness. And they concluded, with a survey of about 500 econometric models, that targeting only adds about 10% to the effectiveness of a campaign on average. A very similar result came from some work by D2D, where they looked at over 200 econometric models from a wide range of categories, and they concluded that targeting of a campaign adds only about 10% to effectiveness. So the same numbers, two very different methods. Reach and scale are the main drivers of effectiveness. In the old days, if you wanted to get video to people, you got them in the evening during primetime TV. Now you can get video to people anywhere. If we had access to our phones, we could be watching video right now. Yep. You can get video to people in the shower, on the bus, whatever. You can get video to everyone from little kids all the way up to sort of, my 90-year-old dad in his flat. Actually, I think this is the rhetoric that you should be pushing, really, it's about reach. It's about incremental reach.
I mean, is that the conversation that you're now having, that the old adage of mass reach comes from traditional media has changed as audiences have gone online and behavioural patterns are different? We know that on average, for young audiences, only 40% of the screen time on a television set is against traditional media channels. The remainder is against online channels. So therefore, you have to broaden your media mix to maximise your reach. And I totally agree with the maximisation of reach drives the storytelling of brand building. But is that getting across to advertisers in terms of how they maximise reach?
And that is, of course, a big question, because it's all very well us talking here about the theory and the empirical evidence for this, but there is an enormous school of thinking out there, particularly, I would say, in the US, that has come to the conclusion that somehow targeting reach is no longer a critical issue, because it is all about serving that sales message at the last moment to a consumer whose data tells us that they are about to buy. And they believe that that is a real substitute. So we have to unpick that mislearning first. And there are some really very senior marketers in some really very big branded goods manufacturers who fundamentally believe that they are not selling brands, they're selling products. And this is an incredibly dangerous development. So I think the battle is enormous long way from being won.
Reach is still the name of the game. Reach and scale are still the name of the game. All the evidence tells you that.
And does reach build trust? Because I think if you listen to, Keith Weed, ex of Unilever, would always say that a brand without trust is just a product.
Yes.
And a product can be replaced. Is trust a core part of brand building in the eyes of the consumers?
I think implicitly. I think there is too much said about trying to explicitly communicate. Trust is something you earn rather than you kind of project. But we know from decades of research that people tend to trust and have more confidence in the brands that they perceive are popular in their world.
And familiarity.
And familiarity.
In fact, actually, psychologists tell us we are most interested in the new and the unfamiliar, and we distrust it. We are most likely to trust the things that are boring and familiar. So being ubiquitous is the key to trust. As Peter said, there is this now a division, I think, between the companies that are smart and that get the importance of brand building and the importance of scale and the importance of reach and all those other things, and the other ones who, frankly, don't understand marketing properly and who think it's all about selling products through tightly targeted messaging. Ultimately, the brand builders will win because the other lot will go out of business or become commoditized. And if you look at smart marketers, they are doing exactly what we preach.
Sure.
I'm contractually bound to mention John Lewis
of course you are.
in any discussion.
Of course you are.
John Lewis,
especially at Christmas.
John Lewis is a brilliant example of, if you like, cutting-edge marketing. It's very ironic that a company that's like 100 and something years old is the exemplar of cutting-edge marketing. But what they do is they use TV and online video, and for their Christmas ads, that's basically it. Supported by paid search. That's basically it. Those three.
But, just building on something Les has said there, I don't want you to think when we use words like smart, we're not saying that particularly startups that go down this pure activation digital route are being done, because we know that is a very good way to get to a critical scale where you've got a business that you can then take somewhere. And without the ability to control your spend, target your message, and be super efficient, a lot of those businesses would never get to the point where they have the luxury of thinking about brand. So let's be clear about that. We're not completely dissing that, but it has its time and its place. And there comes a point when brands reach in their development, when they reach an inflection point, and when they really need to engage with brand building. And our concern is that we live in a world where that understanding of that inflection point, where you need to start leaning to brand building, is not there anymore.
So where is that inflection point? Because obviously, as you know, within Google and within YouTube, we have a mass of small, medium enterprise businesses that are a core bedrock of our business and a bedrock of much of our economies, actually, across Western Europe. What point does a startup or a small, medium enterprise business, what is that inflection point? How do you advise because John Lewis is one brand that can afford to do that. And
absolutely.
It's compared to another brand who might have started in your garage.
It's a really difficult thing to generalise. But what I would say, the first time when I think a business should seriously start thinking about it is when they can no longer kid themselves that they're the new kid on the block. Their technology is being copied. Perhaps their unique panache or sense of self as a brand is no longer quite as exciting and buzzy as it once was. Because at that point, they are going to cease to benefit from the benefit of the new, and they're going to have to start to create something of their own to take them forward. And Les and I have both been very clear about this. The early days of development of brand are in many ways a special case.
Yeah.
You can break a lot of the rules, and you can get away with targeting, short-term thinking, and in many ways that is a sensible thing to do.
When you talk about creative commitment scores in your work and the need to bring new customers into your brand, how important is online video and, of course, unbiased as I am, YouTube, in reaching new audiences to get that context for bringing new customers to your brand?
Well, one of the interesting things about the Cannes study, which I should point out, James Herman did most of the heavy lifting on, I'm a bit of a passenger on this, was that the two media channels that relentlessly over-indexed on effectiveness at all stages in the creative ladder were online video and TV. And again, it comes back to something Les was saying earlier about the unique power of video as a means of expression of creative ideas. It gives it extra power. So, and again, the other thing that shines out from looking at many of these great case studies, and indeed the body of learning from the Cannes database and the Walk database, and indeed the IPA databases, all of which are in violent agreement on this subject, is that one and one makes three, in a sense, when you start putting the reach of TV and online video together. And this shines out for many of the most high-performing cases. They don't choose one, they don't choose the other, they choose both, and they choose many. And creative commitment is a conflation of three different really important effectiveness drivers, which is, again, one of the great findings of this study. That is to say budget, which we all knew anyway. The second of which is duration, which Les and I have been banging on about since the long and the short of it. You need to give a campaign time. And of course, the third element of creative commitment is the diversity of media, the number of media channels you use. Essentially, the more the merrier. So, yes, it is very important to play the reach game using the palette of tools that you have, particularly video tools that you have at your disposal, that will give you the broadest reach for the amount of budget that you have at your disposal. I think that's vitally important, and the ability to finesse that grows with the years.
When you're building brands, you need emotion, and if you want emotion, you need to use video if you can, and you need emotion at scale, you need emotion with reach. And that tends to point in the direction of, as Peter says, TV plus online video. TV gives you very broad reach, particularly amongst older audiences, but if you want to reach the younger audiences as well, you probably need to complement that with online video. One and one makes three. There is a synergy between online and offline video, and each can make the other work harder. If you want to get a really powerful emotional response from people, then stories are an important tool that you should consider using. We've evolved in such a way that we pay attention to stories, we remember stories, they're part of the way we structure our understanding of the world. So creative work that uses storytelling tends to get stronger emotional responses, tends to be remembered better, tends to be more powerful. However, once you've told a story, you can then, if you like, have permission to evoke it and remind people of it. Once I've told you the story of Little Red Riding Hood, and you've remembered that story, and that's embedded in you, then you only need a couple of little cues, you know, a red cloak, a wolf in bed or whatever, to evoke the whole of the story.
Repetition doesn't spoil the prayer.
Yeah, so long-form video for storytelling can then be followed by short-form reminders.
We forget, really, that great brand building, great advertising is show business. It's about creating an unmissable sense of momentum and show around a brand. And if you can do that by playing with the capabilities, unique capabilities of the different video, particularly video, not only video media, but particularly video media, in a way that enhances the show business. It isn't necessarily just a reminder, but it builds on it in some way. I think that can be a powerful way of doing it.
Do you think you can tell a story in 3 seconds? 6 seconds?
The storytelling typically takes longer. you know.
I think you can tell a story even in escalator side videos. As you're going down an escalator, there's a story being told.
But proper emotional storytelling typically takes you on some sort of narrative arc. And human emotional inertia means that it's difficult to get those emotions, to evoke them very, very quickly. Apart from one or two negative emotions actually can be evoked very, very quickly. Fear, you know, outrage, horror. Unfortunately, most of those are not very useful for conventional marketing. One that can be evoked very quickly is humour. So if you've got very, very short time frame, the classic one-liner gag is a way of getting an emotional response from people that you can do.
But then you've got to land it on the brand. So, I mean, to try and answer your question, which is, of course, a very loaded one, Mark, which is that can you tell a story in 3 seconds? Almost certainly not. Can you in 6 seconds? Maybe if you're very clever and very good and you've got a fair win. Can you in 30 seconds? Probably, if you're good. It gets easier along the video form.
I guess you're asking about 3 seconds or 6 seconds because of skipping, aren't you?
Yeah. Well,
okay, so here's my view on that.
Yep.
If you want to actually do an emotional brand building job with the first exposure for an ad, you are not going to do it in that 3 to 6 seconds unless it's just a gag.
Yes.
You've got to get people to watch the ad. Now, there's some research which comes from you lot, which supposedly says that the average length of your most effective YouTube ads is 1 minute 41 seconds, I believe.
I'll take your word.
Yeah, so if you can get people to watch the ad, then online you have permission to actually engage them over much longer timescales.
Yes.
Once they've done that once, then in the 3 or 6 seconds you can remind them of what they've seen before, and then you are reinforcing that initial brand job. But to do the storytelling job, you've got to get them to watch first. So that means creativity that intrigues and hooks people in that first 3 to 6 seconds. But you really do want people to watch.
This is, of course, the unique value of creativity. It's a way of
building brands.
Keeping people in.
I totally agree. I agree with what you're saying, guys. So what about Gen Z? So what about the younger audiences that perhaps are not watching that broadcast moment? Do you think the 60-40 rule applies to that younger audience, or do we have to work harder?
No, absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, it may well be that your media choices for that younger audience would be different, but the fundamental balance of spending the majority of your money building the brand in their memories in order to enable you to activate short-term sales powerfully is totally going to be the case, whether they're Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y, or old fogies like us. It remains the same.
I fundamentally believe that the 60-40 rule is rooted in the structure of the brain and the structure of human communication. It's nothing to do with marketing. It's about how people have evolved.
It's
and that's true.
That's the Bill Byrne back again about humanity.
Humanity, unchanging man. So it's true for children as much as old codgers.
Why then are so many advertisers still actually not listening to the great body of work that you've produced?
Clearly, one important factor in all of this is the pressure marketing is under to deliver ROI.
Yes.
From the CFO particularly. And ROI tends to lead you down the short-term path because the best way of maxing out your ROI is to find ways of spending small amounts of money on very limited but very measurable kind of initiatives. So it takes you down the short-term activation route. And the ROI is often of these short-term activation pieces of activity, I won't call them campaigns because they're not, can be very, very high, but they just don't drive long-term sustainable growth. You have to address that. We have to take this message, this learning, beyond the world of marketing to the general world of business. It's the CFOs and CEOs who really need to, as the great ones do, instinctively understand it. The CFO of Procter & Gamble, read what he's just said about investing in his brands in recession. This is a man who gets it. Now, we need more of those out there. So we've got to take this message up the business food chain, because otherwise there's no point in trying to convince. Many marketers get this, some don't, many do, but in a sense, it's their arms are up their back.
We've had an explosion over the last 10 or 20 years of new ways of measuring marketing effectiveness, which is great, but unfortunately then it's nearly all about measuring short-term effects. And to a large extent in business, what you measure is what you do. So the more we measure short-term effects, the more short-term we become.
So let me ask you an even more direct question, and a more personal question for my business. I mean, given the scale, the diversity, and the breadth of reach of a platform and a channel like YouTube, what do you put down to some of the reasons why advertisers aren't looking to build brands using YouTube as much as we think they should?
In the world of online video, you really need people to want to watch that ad from beginning to end. In the world of TV, sure, they can leave the room, but, by and large, they don't. So by and large, they may lose focus slightly, but they will probably see your ad, even if it's only mediocre. So you can get away with much more mediocre creative in the world of TV. I think in the world of online video, the entry level for creativity, if you really want to build brands in online video, is much higher.
Yes.
So, the stakes are higher.
In the old days, they needed to build, just the one 30-second ad or the 160 and 30 and a cut down of 20. They now realise they've got to build 100 or 500 ads, different pieces of creativity with newsroom speed, so as to be able to adjust.
It's a big expense, and it takes your eye off the quality ball and bloody-bloody-blah.
You're saying, why aren't advertisers comfortable with using YouTube, channels like YouTube, for brand building? I think they are, actually. It may be that because I work at Adam and Eve, we are working with perhaps, sort of, if you like, first division advertisers. But I think most of them are very comfortable with the idea of using online video for brand building. You do get some companies that feel that, it's enough to make a little video, put it up there, and then just let it fly. Scale is what matters. And actually, you talked about multiple pieces of creative delivered at newsroom speed. I think that's completely wrong.
I'm misquoting someone else.
Yeah, well, okay. Because most businesses don't need to make that many pieces of creative work. What they need is fewer pieces. My bosses will probably not appreciate this, but fewer pieces of creative work, sweated harder and given more exposure and run for longer.
But when you sweat them too hard,
there may be times when they need to do that. There may be times when there is an opportunity to that. But I think as a way of life for a brand, I think it's very tough. Very
You're going to talk about wear out.
Well, I'll talk about wear out.
Wear out is almost a myth.
I think wear out may once have been a problem. When we first started working in advertising, maybe it did happen, but I think it's vanished.
Wear out has almost always been a myth. So I talked to the
maximum frequency. There's no maximum frequency in your book.
Not quite.
I think people can't afford it.
Let me finish. So I talked to the global head of research for a large multinational corporation that takes measurement very, very seriously and always has. They run econometric modelling over all their campaigns. They've done it in multiple markets for decades. Yeah. And he told me he has never seen a convincing example of an ad wearing out. Never. This idea that somehow brands need to be producing multiple executions personalised on a daily basis is just bullshit.
Well, that's super important then, because actually for this audience is actually therefore let's kill that myth. Because if that's a blocker in people changing their media choices, the media buying choices, then we should also discuss that.
It would be much better to focus your efforts on producing a small number of really good ones. Because what we do know from decades of evidence is that great ads, kind of never die. They may very, very slowly fade away, but they never really die. The power of creativity and the great idea should be supreme, but you just cannot do that. If you set yourself a comms model that involves massively complex matrices of multiple ads targeting multiple different consumer segments with different approaches, not only is that a bit of a dog's breakfast at the end of the day, but also you just simply cannot give the quality attention to detail that you need.
And it comes back to your point about minute targeting. You think is also again a challenge in reaching brand building scale.
I mean, it's wrong in all sorts of ways. I mean, you end up getting lowest denominator creative that way.
And what about measurement, though?
You lose any sense of shared social
Yes.
community meaning for a brand. What we really need is good measurements of exposure, reach, frequency, and spend across all channels on a like-for-like basis. We need to be able to, in an independent way, say, this is how much people are spending across all channels.
Yep.
This is how much exposure they're getting for that money. This is how it builds in terms of reach. This is how it builds in terms of frequency. And until we do that properly, we're all kind of flying blind.
And I
also,
totally agree with you. On
how-
that transparency
how-
piece,
Yeah.
we want to champion that
Yeah.
with you.
But it has an extra importance as well. It's not simply a question of kind of understanding what you get. We will never move the learning forward unless people really understand how to compare, two different executions or two different approaches. If we don't have reliable, transparent metrics that enable us to really lift the hood on those, how are we ever going to move forward?
How do you think about the seemingly need in a digital world for brands to expect immediate gratification, immediate results?
People have sometimes misinterpreted what we've said about long-term brand building, as if that somehow we're saying that brand building is something that only works in the long term. We've never said that.
Okay.
I mean, I love Jeremy Bullmore's quote about that, is that great advertising sells now and forever. If you look at the really great brand ads, they typically do sell right now. You can see it. I mean, you put an ad on TV, you put an ad on YouTube, you start to get, traffic to the website within seconds.
Yes.
Literally within seconds, Brand building, that flow of sales keeps going. Whereas the short-term activation stuff gives you the blip, but nothing else.
If you've got a great piece of creative, you can make a sizable impact on a brand overnight.
Yeah.
But actually, you'd be much smarter to realise it's a long game and that it's about reinforcement of those associations.
Yeah.
Through...
It's about constantly
Propagating.
Yeah, I mean, if that weren't true, then we wouldn't have the share of voice rule, which
Yes.
Les and I bang on about,
Yeah.
which relates share of market to share of
Yeah.
voice. If you could achieve all of this with one quick noisy bang, then that rule wouldn't exist.
Yep. So, guys, I want to talk about the unprecedented navigating COVID, navigating the impending recession. How do you advise all sizes and shapes of advertisers to commit to their marketing through COVID, even if their products may not be available or their service may not be available?
We have both been very consistent about the importance of brand building throughout all of this for businesses, because even if you can't sell now, even if people are not going to buy you now because of they're short of cash, how you behave as a brand during the crisis will affect what happens in the recovery and where you end up when we get back to normal.
Recessions have always been great opportunities for those smart businesses like Procter & Gamble who realise that this is a chance to steal a march on their weaker competitors. They can very cheaply buy big exposure for their brands, so that not because they're necessarily wanting to drive sales now, they're going to accept that sales are down for some of their categories, not all, of course, but because it means that when we come out of this recession, guns blazing, and that is so strongly proven now. There's a lot of evidence to say that's the way
But you would accept, though, a slight blend of more greater activation to stay in business.
Not for a moment saying that you walk away. The 60-40 rule still applies, and it may well be, depending, as Les has said, on the precise nature of your category. If you, for instance, you are Zoom, you're a subscription business, you would be crazy not to make hay while the sun shines. And I would always advise a business in that situation, yes, dial up the activation, get those, as it were, bums on seats. But on the other hand, there are businesses where playing the short-term game is pretty dumb because there isn't that much business out there to be had, and you might as well play the long-term. So there are, of course, variations, and I think you've got to use your own nous and intuition. But fundamentally, you still need to do both, brand and activation, in some kind of balance that is right for the context of your business and what's going on.
There are some brands right now that are cutting spend where it is obviously madness to do so. And examples would be brands in categories where demand is still healthy, like, most packaged goods or home entertainment. Demand is healthier than ever.
Yeah.
There are no restrictions on supply, no restrictions on distribution. So all of that's healthy, and media prices are low. So it's the buying opportunity of the century.
And audiences are high.
Yeah.
And audiences are high, which is the other
So
piece.
there are brands out there right now where I know that ROI from advertising for those brands will never be as high as it is now. And yet they're cutting spend out of a kind of herd panic, you know. And that is because they're idiots.
Well,
So, changing tack slightly, what are the biggest challenges that you see marketeers are going to face in the years to come?
Well, there's lots of challenges with all the new technology, all the new platforms, all the new media, and all the new metrics, just making sense of it all. It has become very complex and very, very difficult to navigate your way through. I think it's important for marketers to understand that the fundamentals don't change, even though all the different ways that it's expressed may.
for me, I think the biggest challenge is just learning, which we really need to do, learning how to use the new tools to build brands. I think it's been a ridiculous waste of the potential of new digital tools that they have become by default activation tools. That is the critical challenge I think they really need to rise to, because whatever those future tools are, it's learning how to use them to build brands. That's the challenge.
Perhaps that's one of the reasons why our stuff's got a bit of traction, is when we talk about things like brand versus activation, the 60-40 rule, the share of voice rule, they're big picture rules. They're not about the micro details of using this particular channel at this particular moment. They're about how you make sure that your marketing as a whole is cohesive. Keeping the big picture and the long game in mind is one of the biggest challenges.
And then a couple of quick-fire questions. What are you hooked on TV at home at this moment in time during the lockdown period?
We've been watching a lot of comedy. We watch movies and stuff, but actually we found that the thing that most helped us to get through lockdown is comedy.
Comedy for Les?
It's actually those old reruns, you know, box set kind of reruns, as it were, from the past. They're very comforting. So this idea that the way to come through a crisis is to be concerned with the now and the immediate, I don't think it's true. We find great comfort in the past and the reruns.
What is the last thing you watched on that there YouTube?
YouTube. Well, again, it's not very helpful, probably not the right answer, but when you're moving home, you're making a lot of kit and you're unpacking stuff, and it's a lot of those how-to videos,
Some of the most popular, extensively popular videos that exist on that channel.
Many of them, and I make great use of them, particularly now when I'm trying to assemble a strimmer, for instance.
Absolutely.
Try doing that without a YouTube video.
Without a YouTube video.
There was a time when my daughter and I used to sit and have breakfast together in the morning, and we'd typically watch YouTube, but we'd watch YouTube on the TV.
Sure, it's the fastest growing
bit of the platform. And to be honest, it was just like watching TV.
You're sitting back, you're using it pretty much like a TV channel.
Yeah.
It's a much more acceptable environment for advertisers.
We have sound and motion.
Yeah, you definitely watch it in a slightly different way when you're, as opposed to watching it on the mobile or a laptop. Well, I had this little epiphany when Alice and I were watching, YouTube one morning. Wengie and Max, that was our obsession at that point. We sat and watched an ad it was basically a 3-minute infomercial for nuclear energy. We sat and watched 3 minutes of stuff about nuclear energy.
Thank you.
Because I think when you're watching YouTube on the TV, you're much less likely to skip. You watch it in that lean back, passive, low involvement, classic TV viewing thing. You don't want to fiddle it. The main thing you're focusing on is your toast and your tea and chatting to each other and then kind of gazing slack-jawed at what's on the screen.
And the comfort of your environment.
Yeah. Anyone who says that people will not watch long-form video on YouTube should have sat and watched us watching 3 minutes. About nuclear energy.
So did you click the buy button? Did you buy a nuclear reactor?
Yeah, we bought some uranium.
Right.
Right there and then.
So, guys, as we move towards the conclusion of our session today, wonder in sort of a one succinct one line, if you could sum up the benefits of your years of experience in brand building and effectiveness in a multimedia world.
Okay, my one line. Nothing sells like emotion, and nothing generates emotion like video.
And my one line would be, take care of the long, because the short will leave you short.
Oh, I like that.
Thank you. Fantastic. Guys, I just want to say a fascinating session. I want to thank you both so much for joining us today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learnt. I hope all of you folks have done so as well. Thanks once again, Peter and Les.
Thanks for inviting us.